Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a follow-up on my Mystery 411 video. That's an interesting conspiracy theory and a really popular series. If you didn't watch the video, it's about people that went missing under mysterious circumstances, usually in national parks in the United States and Canada. But there's a bunch of different cases that seem to tie together in a similar way. And the thing about a magic trick is it's about deceiving the audience's perception of what's happening. And a really good magician will even let the audience think that the deception is happening at a different point in the trick that it's actually happening. But usually, right from the very beginning, the premise that you've been sold by the magician is a complete lie, and nothing that actually happened in the trick was actually happening the way you thought it was. And these Mystery 411 cases, when they're told the way that David Paulides tells them, it sort of reminds me of a magic trick. Because you might think that the mystery is happening behind the parent's back, or in a way that can't be seen or recorded or understood. But in a lot of these cases, it seems like what's really happening is right from the very beginning. The parent's reporting is incorrect, and that might be for a few different reasons. One, that they're just so scatterbrained that they actually don't remember what direction their child went in, and they don't remember the last time they saw them. And then another thing is that a lot of people don't want to sound terrible, like they weren't paying attention to their friend, loved one, or family member, when the fact of the matter was that they lost track of them a long time ago and are just trying to save their ego or save their psyche from having to face a fact that, you know, is too uncomfortable for them. I have other problems with David Paulides though, and I was hinting at a lot of them in the video, but the main one being that he ties some cases that I think are actually legitimately mysterious and might actually have like supernatural or extra natural or things that are outside of our normal experience or understanding that are happening. We'll just say, for the sake of argument, like Bigfoot. But I mean, there's lots of other animals like cougars, mountain lions, pumas, whatever the hell you want to call them. They'll move a kill. And black bears, even though people underestimate black bears, they will kill people, and like a child. They'll move the kill. But David will tie those mysterious, maybe it's Bigfoot cases, in with cases that are clearly murder or gross negligence on somebody's part, whether it be the police or the parents or the guardian or friends or whoever was there. David actually has released 2 documentaries as well. The first one that I think is just called Mystery 411. It's actually pretty good, and it gives you a good idea of some of the examples that are in his book. So Survivor Man, he's in the documentary, and he's talking about cases that he thinks are Bigfoot. He's actually a believer in Bigfoot. He's made several videos that you can actually see them here on YouTube, where he is going around looking at different structures that he thinks were made by Bigfoot and talks about different phenomenon that he thinks ties back to them. And the fact of the matter is, if I'm a very skeptical person. I know that it made people very uncomfortable that I was talking about, you know, not normally accepted things like in history and science and stuff recently. But the truth is that I'm actually massively skeptical of those things, those narratives. And something like Bigfoot and Mothman and a lot of the videos that I'm going to be coming out with in the near future, I'm going to be getting very close to them, sort of like I did with the tinfoil helmet series. But again, I want to remind everybody that I am massively skeptical of these things. I want to believe a lot of them, but I just can't bring myself to it. And Bigfoot is actually a really good example of that. Like, gun to my head, if you ask me if there's one supernatural, extra natural phenomenon, you know, that I think is real, it's got to be Bigfoot, you know. That's the one that has the most evidence for it. And the Patterson-Gimlin film, basically the most undebunkable piece of supernatural evidence that has ever existed. And that's what my next video is going to be about. I'm not going to say that's proof, but the thing is that there is just a lot of evidence that something like Bigfoot exists. But anyways, that documentary and then the other documentary, the second one, which is really shitty, I would suggest against watching the second Mystery 411 documentary. Such a waste of time. But he talks about some, like, just normal missing people's cases that just are old men getting lost in the woods and never coming back. No big surprise. But at the end, he has some weird shit where a lady is like, I saw a predator in the trees and it was all shimmery and I could see through it like it was cloaked. Then they show a map of the United States and like the cloak thing going across the map, and they're like, all of these missing people might be going into other dimensions or some shit, and it's just like insulting, horrendously insulting. So when it comes down to it, the real question is, why is David Paulides doing this? So I would like to believe in my heart of hearts that he's a cop, okay? He's an ex-police officer. He's using cop language, you know, very lawyery way to sort of describe the circumstances of the case. And even though he's presenting it to like Bigfoot communities and UFO communities, if you listen close to the way he's presenting it, if you know that he's using cop talk, then you know what he's actually saying, if you read between the lines, is that this is a murder case. You know, the police believe this was murder. So Anthony Anadero is a really good example of that. Police are only allowed to say so much about an active case, and if they don't have any suspects, if they can't find any evidence to postulate that it might be murder, like if they find nothing, then they can't call it a murder case. And they can't say that we believe the father murdered the son, you know? Not when it happens in a national park that way. That's not the way the Park Service works. So unfortunately, a lot of those cases just get deemed as missing people's cases, even though the police are pretty confident that they think it was murder. If they can't find evidence, there's nothing they can do about it. That's just the way things are in national parks. I'm hoping that I'm right about that, and that he's not just exploiting all of these missing people's cases, because he is making a little bit of money off of this. I mean, you gotta make money off of what you do. I'm making money off of what I do. Everybody does, to a certain extent. That's life, you know? And the thing is that I would be willing to pay money for his book series, because they are interesting cases. And if you look at those cases individually, you know, and you want to use your brain to sort of figure it out based on the information that he's given you, you know, you'll find some that you are actually stumped on. And that's kind of fun. I hate to make entertainment out of something as serious and tragic as missing people or murder, things like that. But the thing is, that's what my whole new series, Tell Me More, if that's what I'm going to call the series, I think that's what the point is that it's sort of fun to use your brain to do things that you wouldn't normally do, and mysteries and unsolved crimes and supernatural things and urban legends, things that can't really just be explained in a normal way within our normal experience. It's fun to do that, and there's nothing wrong with letting yourself believe things. Like, I play devil's advocate with a lot of stuff. The skeptic character is 100% skeptical of everything. He's way more skeptical of things than I am. But in real life, like, I like to let myself believe something for as long as humanly possible until my skeptical senses start just bashing it out of my head. And that's sort of just the way my mind works. No matter how much I want to believe something or I let myself believe it, my skepticism always takes over. I could see how nervous it made people to see me in that headspace where I was letting myself believe it, like when I was doing my tinfoil helmet series. Joshua the Lame asks, Joshua the Awesome asks, when are you going to debunk all of the conspiracies that you've proposed to make a point about how non-skeptical we are? I never promised I would debunk them. I said that I'm making you guys the skeptic. But that gave me a really good idea, though, because with the Tell Me More series, I am kind of doing it with both sides of my head, you know, the believer and the skeptic. So I think that it would be fun to sort of show you guys how I get close to believing something from a skeptical standpoint. And then in part 2 sort of debunk that. So I can even make these videos 2-parters, and I think that'd be fun because it would even let you watch only the believer videos all at once, and then you can let yourself stay in that mindset for as long as possible, and then you can watch the skeptical videos afterwards and then see how I tear myself out of those headspaces, you know? So that'll be fun too. Say my next video is about Bigfoot, for example. I'll tell you how I went from being a skeptic of Bigfoot to a believer, and then in part 2, I'll just debunk all of the points that make me believe that Bigfoot might exist. But there are some really good examples of comments. I think that what's amazing is I have not seen a ton of videos about Mystery 411 that actually brought up the sort of points that I did about police corruption being a possibility, and that just the people involved, like the parents or the guardians or whoever was there, are just lying or being misleading about the details that they give the police. Unfortunately, the Jared Adadero case, I think, is a perfect example of that as well. I think every single thing the police were told by the Christians and by the father was a lie or misleading. And I think even everything the police told Anthony Adadero was a lie or misleading. But I think that they did that because they considered him a suspect. Like, they wouldn't let him on the course. They wouldn't let him on the trail. And they threatened to arrest him if he tried to. And, you know, that's usually only if we're talking about a crime scene and we're talking about possible suspects. So I think that all the police there knew we weren't dealing with a normal kid that just ran off. I think they could tell right from the very beginning that things were not adding up. Like, for one thing, the father was never in direct contact with the Christians about taking his son to the hatchery or to the trail. The daughter was an intermediary there. And several times in the story, the daughter is used as an intermediary for all sorts of different information. And I think the reason for that is they did that to create intentional reasonable doubt. So anything that they hear, they're hearing it, you know, from the child's mouth. It's an account of a 6-year-old, and you can't count on that being accurate, first of all. Also, what it does is they're trying to remove responsibility of the father for not tying the shoes, not knowing what's going on with the whole thing. Then everybody can be like, oh, well, we told the daughter we're going to the trail. It's not our fault she didn't tell the dad, you know? It just seems like everybody's trying to skirt around taking responsibility for what happened. The detail where he didn't tie the kid's shoes, that just shows that he's admitting that he's a terrible father by doing that. But then the fact that the Christians took him on the trail, and that they broke up into different groups and nobody was really taking this responsibility for the kids, and that the person who had arbitrarily taken responsibility for him had noticed that he was missing for 20 minutes. Like, it wasn't an immediate thing. That's sketchy and is probably a lie. So, anyways, I think the point I was making is that I've never really seen anybody talk about Mystery 411 and try to break it down the way that I did. Most people like to stick to the more supernaturally sounding cases, and those are fun. But the truth of the matter is that this is one of the more serious cases, and I'm hoping that every other, you know, video that I do in this series from now on won't be so doomy and gloomy, and we can have more fun with it. But it's good to see, though, that a lot of you guys seem to really pick up on this, and you seem to be in the same mindset. It's good to see that I'm not the only one that sees it this way. The Jolie says that I turned around for a second and the person was gone sounds like exaggerated nonsense. More like I wasn't paying attention for several minutes And it wasn't until we stopped to camp when I noticed that one person was missing. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is people are not going to tell the police that, you know, like a 14-year-old, for example, has been missing for half a day and that they didn't notice until they had crossed 2 mountains and set up camp. You know, that kind of thing. People are going to do their best to avoid responsibility because even in a national park, if you tell the police the wrong thing and then, you know, the kid turns up dead or whatever, they can still charge you with manslaughter, negligence kind of thing, and you can still end up in prison for it. So just take care of your fucking kids, okay? Don't take them to a national park unless you are planning on taking care of them. Stevie Love says, I've always been of the mindset with Missing 411 that most of these aren't quite what David thinks they are, but I do believe a fraction of them are legit. I'm assuming by legit she means mysterious. It's easy to get carried away with speculation when answers aren't easy to find. And that's true, and that's what a lot of these cases come down to, and that's sort of my problem with the way that he mixes them all together. When you can't immediately piece a story together in your mind, your initial thoughts are not going to be, oh, the parents are negligent, because your psyche won't allow you to believe that somebody is incapable of unconditional love for their child, you know? Some of the most high-profile cases in Mystery 411, if you really think about it, can be boiled down to a parent wasn't paying attention to their kid for a very long time and then pretended that it was only a split second. And you hear things like, Christians were taking care of him, and you want to think that means, oh, good people, you know? Right-minded people, people with good hearts. But the thing is, it was like a Christian singles group. And the thing is that those are kind of creepy. Again, there's good Christians in those groups too, but like if you think about the whole premise of a Christian singles group, it's kind of weird. And the fact that they were like camping together and working together and, you know, doing this lodging thing at the Puda Canyon fishing lodge or whatever, that was really... Everything about that group just seemed bizarre and creepy. Like, they probably weren't the kind of people I would want to hang out with. And the thing is that a lot of Christian groups will be filled with a lot of, like, good-hearted, well-meaning people that love God and love Jesus. But within those groups, there'll be people that are actually kind of crooked-minded and are trying to come across as good or work towards being good by mixing with those people, but they have like a greater evil within them that ends up coming out eventually. And like that's one thing people always point out about feminists is like how many male feminists are there that have you know, assaulted women. It's like a lot of high profile ones, and it's because it's like they want to atone for being those terrible people by taking on a mantle or an identity that sort of immediately gives the impression that they're a well-meaning, good-hearted person. So, you know, in a case like this, like you almost have to be more suspicious that there's a member of the Christian singles group that probably had something to do with it. Also, if you look at the map that I show you in that video, there are a couple of public locations around there. It's not a really super secluded location. In fact, there's a university campus nearby the park. It's an annex for the nearby university. And, you know, any of the students or staff that live there or work there could have snuck off the campus and hidden in that park and waited for somebody to come by that, you know, was unattended or alone. You know, there's lots of weird disappearances in national parks that can also be chalked up to just somebody was at that national park that wasn't supposed to be there, didn't tell anybody they were there, they just snuck onto the park. And they basically just, like a predator, sat there and waited for a victim to come by. That's unfortunately not the craziest thing in the world. Andrea M says, Here's my conspiracy about the Paulides conspiracy. David was sort of a rogue officer while with the San Jose Police Department, and a serial Bigfoot enthusiast. The missing 411 concept was his way of exposing law enforcement and government corruption under the guise of science fiction. By lightly touching the subject, he's been able to attract more followers, and over time, it's gotten pretty clear what he's trying to show us. Again, that's what I'd like to believe. The reason I chose this comment to sort of highlight that is because if you think about it, how he's garnering his audience is the thing that I have the most problem with. Maybe that's because that's sort of the thing I've been accused of the most when I was making socio-political videos that I probably shouldn't have been making because I'm not super well educated or, you know, wise on those subjects. People could have used my work to make arguments that I wasn't trying to make. And David, though, the thing is, he's doing that intentionally. And if you look, there's like cases where he's at a UFO convention, and he's, you know, at the end of his talk, and he usually gives a bunch of different examples, and he gives shorthand versions of some of his more high-profile stories, and then encourages people to buy the book. And the book is where you get all the cases that are just normal cases of murder that have been, you know, mixed in with a few mysterious cases. And then at the end of the talk, when he's doing the Q&A, people will be like, is it Bigfoot? Is it aliens? And then David has to be like, yep, you know, that's one of the theories that people have asked me. So he's not saying yes or no to what his belief of the theory is. And that's one of the biggest things, is he refuses to give an answer as to what he thinks it is. But he sits there and grins and bears it while people give him the most ridiculous ideas for the most explainable stories. And he has to just sit there and be like, yep, yeah, lots of people think it might be Bigfoot. You're right. That's what a lot of people are saying. And like, if he is really doing this to expose police corruption and expose all of these murder cases that have been forcefully labeled as missing people's cases because they couldn't find enough evidence, he's the one bearing the burden of that by having to sit there and listen to all of these idiots talk about crazy supernatural shit when he knows that the real answer is something explainable. That would kill me. I couldn't do that. I would explode in front of those people. So if that's what he's doing, you know, he's got a pretty strong resolve if he can just sit there and take that barrage of nonsense when he's trying to teach the world about, you know, a bigger problem. So I hope that's what is happening, and that it's not the polar opposite, being that he's trying to pass off explainable cases as supernatural to detract attention away from them. But if the truth is that he's bringing light to cases that were otherwise unknown. A lot of Mystery 411 cases were cold and buried, and he actually had to do digging to find them. And the day he gets that list that costs $1.4 million, the day he gets that list and makes it fucking public, that'll be the day that I say I was wrong about David Paulides, and that I think he was doing the right thing the whole time. He might have been doing it the wrong way, but he's doing the right thing. And I think that if there is a reason that he's hiding it, it's because, first of all, he doesn't want to out police officers, because there is like a camaraderie, a brotherhood, if you will, among police officers. They will not out each other. And then there's another thing where it is really uncomfortable to say that parents killed their own children. Nobody wants to be the person to say that, especially when you can't prove it, because then you just come across as a monster. Because, you know, usually that parent was like a community leader and well loved by other people or something. So there's going to be people running to their defense. Patrick Brewer basically sums up, you know, my thoughts on trying to make things seem supernatural when they're not really. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence. And a lot of these cases, I'm sure that's what it is. Actually, Red Letter Media, in their Best of the Worst series, I think it was one of the Wheel of the Worsts, they did a video about how to survive being lost in the wilderness in Canada. It's called Hug a Tree, even though the main advice is to not hug a tree, but basically just stay put. And you want to stay put somewhere where you can see from the air, because if you're missing long enough, they'll send out helicopters and planes to look down, so you want to be visible. If you're a tiny child watching this video. Actually, anybody. If you get lost in the woods, you don't want to wander around too much. Like, if you move too much, it'll be harder to find you. So just be somewhere visible. But one of the interesting things I found about that video was that when the police or whatever were asking the parents where the kid went, the mother told the police officer the entirely opposite direction that the kid went. And then, you know, the host of the video was like, actually, he went the other way. And I think that you could say that maybe that's a parent trying to get rid of a kid that's, you know, burdensome, or trying to murder their child or get their child lost so they don't have to worry about them anymore. But also, in the heat of the moment, you know, when you can't find your kid, if you are a fully loving parent, you're panicking. And when you're panicking, you can't keep your shit together. And chances are you're going to say things that are not true, not realizing that you're the one hindering the search. Just be aware of that if, you know, you're responsible for people and they go missing. Be very sure that you're remembering it correctly, because you'll think that you have, but everything will be completely different from what you remembered. Chase Jab says, it's like you spent a decade going around letting all the flat earth, ancient alien, conspiracy theory nuts know that they have no basis in their belief, and then immediately say, but if you do want to believe some crazy shit. I just put that in there because I thought it was awesome, and it makes me sound awesome. I'm pretty awesome. There were some funny comments about how I'm now mastering the thing that I swore to destroy. I swear, I'm not Anakin Skywalker. I'm Luke Skywalker, all right? And then Sully1, I'm not really gonna respond to this, but I want you guys to see this. A few personal notes of the last case, the Anthony added arrow case. Okay, we'll start with point 2 here. The dad would have been one of the first suspects in a potential murder. However, from the weirdness of the situation, I have to wonder where the 6-year-old went in the middle of this. I do not expect her to socialize very well with a group of adults, especially Christian singles. That puts them in their 20s at least. So she should have been with her brother for a majority of the time. But instead, she's suspended from the narrative even though she's the main cultivator of the situation. The communication between all of the adults. That's what I think is the 6-year-old was almost used as an excuse for the communication breakdown as opposed to the actual communicator. And there's a lot of places where she's sort of conveniently injected into the story. Like, she's the one that said that she heard Jared screaming, like a playful scream. So that's where that comes from. There's a lot of really weird details that come from her that, like, no good parent would be like, oh, my 6-year-old daughter has created a play date. I might as well send my 3-year-old off to the whatever miles away fish hatchery. Like, that makes sense to me. I don't need to talk to any adults. Nothing about that situation really makes any sense. If the caretaker of the kids was only in charge of the boy while another the daughter, then I would suspect a bad person in the group. But the one overall that wasn't aware of being in charge of the kids sounds more like simple manipulation tactics, right? That, with the addition of the boy supposedly yelling in a playful manner while the father's tracks never being found in the area, lead me to believe the daughter having a more fundamental part in the boy's disappearance. Yeah, that was the possibility I didn't want to really bring up in the video. Is that maybe the reason why the daughter is used in such a wishy-washy way in the narrative describing the events that happened. I'm almost worried that what happened is she accidentally killed him or something, and then everybody was just trying to cover that up. And if that's the case, then that's really fucking sad. But it would have been better if we all just knew that. Because just not knowing what happened to the kid and wondering if, like, he was, a bad thing happened to him, that a bad person did to him and then murdered him and then placed the body back there 4 years later. That's really tragic. Oh, and speaking of the father being a suspect, I also want to add the detail that he told David Paulides that some member of the police department told him that Jared's body was found in the water, but they couldn't get it because it's too cold and they'll have to come back 4 years later to retrieve it. And I was just like, what the fuck is that? Yeah, what the fuck is that? That sounds like something the dad made up. Whoever told him that couldn't have known that they were going to find Jared's remains 4 years later. That's too big a coincidence, right? So it's almost like the dad was like, oh, the police told me that we'll find him in 4 years. And then it just so happened that we found him in 4 years. Except he wasn't in the fucking river. He was 500 feet above the river on a rock ledge that he could not possibly have reached on his own. I doubt that a 3-year-old would have much foreknowledge about bears other than they exist, and wilderness exploration wouldn't be the strong suit either. From my understanding, a 3-year-old would have been prompted about bears in order to ask anyone, and that knowledge could have been skewed beyond recollection. And then he comes up with a weird theory as to the bear thing. I think that the bear thing is weird too, and it almost seems like somebody in his group told him about bears, and that prompted him in some way to run ahead of the group, either excitedly to see if he could go see a bear, which is probably what it was, or he was told like, oh no, look out, there's bears, you better run, which I hope that's not what it was. Either way, really, he might have run into a trap that was waiting for him, or he might have run off into the woods and then, you know, the wrong member of the group chased after him to collect him. And there's a lot of reason to have suspicion around the bear thing, and that's the reason why I left that in the video. It seems like it's nothing, but it might be everything. It might be the reason why he was separated from the group. The exact way he asked the fishermen is he asked them if they knew if they were in bear country. That's not how a 3-year-old talks. Like, kids say the darndest things, but even then, he's repeating words that an adult used. 4, on the police communication, plenty could be going on, but overall I expect that there was a mistranslation on Alan's part, where if there was a body in the water, it would be preserved for up to 4 years. Yeah, I don't know about that. Either way, it's a lot of the miscommunication with Alan shows that the police didn't trust him. And then a lot of the things, like they lied to him about how many exits there were. And he went to David Paulides and told him, he's like, they told me there's only one exit, but there was 2 exits from that part of the park. The reason they said that to him was to see what he would do with that knowledge. Because if he's the murderer, he would have known to use the other exit, basically. That's the point. So you can read the rest of that comment yourself. I don't want to get myself in trouble by repeating the words in this. There is reason to believe, unfortunately, that Jared Adadero did not just slip into a time portal and then come back out 4 years later, you know. Somebody had him during that time and then put him back there 4 years later. So anyways, thank you everybody. I hope you're enjoying my new series. The next video is going to be so much fun. I'm so excited about it. Please leave a comment below about any future videos that you want to see in my Tell Me More series. And don't forget to check out my merch store, and of course, please support me on Patreon. Thank you to all of my patrons for your support. I couldn't do it without you guys.